My name is Dr Lucy Durneen and I'm a teaching associate in creative writing at the University of Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. I'm a poet and a short story writer, and this is a brief glimpse into my favourite literary form. Human beings are storytelling animals. We've been telling stories ever since we've been able to communicate them. We've been attempting to pin them down and pass them on to others before we had the written means to do so. In the beginning, it was through the painting of a hunt on the walls of a cave, the parables in the stained glass of a church window, in the vampire myth that's handed down via word of mouth through a community from generation to generation. The stories we tell exist all around us, today as much in the status update we've just added to Facebook, or the anecdote we recount when we get home from work and tell a loved one about our day, as in the books we read. Human beings tell stories because it's our primary way of connecting with the world, of anchoring our place in the world, of making sense of the world. And more so than at any other time, perhaps, the exchange of our personal stories becomes a way to generate empathy and to understand the experience of people who have experienced life differently from ourselves. A much wiser writer than I once told me that really all the short story has to do is tell the story of the human heart. What makes a short story short is not just a question of length. Key features of the form are compression, economy of language, obliquity, but particularly the fact that, as Ernest Hemingway famously put it, 9/10 of the story, like an iceberg, is below the surface of the narrative. And it's in that dark oceanic space beneath the physical sentences on the page that we as readers can join the invisible dots. This is where the reader is invited into the story to imagine all the things that are not being said, to call on their own experience and make deeper connections. B.S. Pritchett says that the short story is a moment glimpsed in passing from the corner of the eye. A friend once told me that she was sitting on a bus in downtown Manhattan when she heard someone say, "Otto burst in the pool yesterday." Now there's a short story right there if ever I heard one. It's the snippet of conversation that lingers in your mind all day, the snapshot of a moment. You don't know what came before or after, but for a moment you were there, consumed by wanting to know. But human beings aren't just storytelling animals, we're also story-listening animals. The pleasure of being told a story is something we might first have enjoyed as a child, or something we've discovered in adulthood, particularly now as there's any number of apps that we can download to have a celebrity read us a bedtime story. So, I'd like to share a favourite story of mine. It's by an American writer called Amy Hempel, who probably isn't as well known here in the UK as she deserves to be. She came from Chicago, grew up in Denver. Her first collection was published in 1984, her most recent in 2019. She writes about love, death, the body, the human impulse to dream, maybe dream too much. She writes a lot about dogs. She writes about marriages that hurt and friendships that hurt, and takes us right up to the lake edge of how much the whole thing just sometimes hurts, but shows us how to survive it, how to live. In her stories, not a word is wasted. Everything is earning its place. There's nothing in her writing that's just along for the ride. She has an uncanny knack of expressing something I felt I knew but had never quite figured out how to put into words. Rick Moody says of Amy Hempel that she's all about the sentences, and how her sentences ache with longing and beauty and a profound understanding of the world's contradictions. I think the story I want to share expresses one of her best. So here it is. Sitting comfortably. Memoir. Just once in my life. Or when have I ever wanted anything? Just once in my life. One sentence, a whole story. In fact, not just a whole story, but a lifetime of stories. To start with, we're immediately alerted by the word memoir to the idea of looking back over a life. It's a word that speaks to time, to distance from an event, to memory, to a span of years. It implies time passing. All that compressed into just 6 letters. We don't actually know anything about Hempel's narrator. We don't know their age, their gender, their race, their status. We don't know what's prompted them to suddenly decide to confide this in us, the reader, at this point in time. But what we do know, all we need to know, comes from the words, just once. It's an expression reserved for when we really, really want something. This narrator is yearning, and something instinctive tells us this isn't the first time. Below that ordinary cliche, just once in my life, in that iceberg realm of the story, is the hint of the many, many times this narrator has wanted something and probably didn't get it. So many other stories existing inside this one for us to imagine. They say that when we die, our life flashes in front of our eyes. In just 17 words, Hempel gives us Pritchett's sidelong glimpse of the narrator's life, tantalises us, and then moves on. But there's another thing. It's a deep down, almost primeval kind of knowing, but we recognise that yearning means something is missing from a person's life. Something has been lost. And is there a human heart out there who hasn't experienced that? If you're interested to learn more about the short story or other kinds of writing, you might like to explore the courses we run at ICE, from online courses on specific forms to our certificates and diplomas, and the Masters in Creative Writing.